The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get right into it. I took some serious heat yesterday when I stated that a new poll has Hillary Clinton dominating Bernie Sanders in Iowa after a brief period where the polls were within the margin of error. I will follow up about that, but first I want to talk about a new poll which has Hillary Clinton now taking the lead over Bernie Sanders in New Hampshire, widely considered to be the Bernie stronghold in the Democratic primary. In this new poll, we have Hillary Clinton at 48%, Bernie Sanders at 45%. This is a Monmouth University poll. The previous iteration of the same poll had Hillary Clinton down to Bernie Sanders 41 to 49. Interestingly enough, the same poll has Bernie Sanders with a higher favorability rating than Hillary Clinton, 86 to 79. But, and this is the question that has surfaced from our audience about the poll I mentioned in Iowa yesterday, and this is the question about the new Monmouth University poll. Is the poll sample correct? Let's read the fine print. The Monmouth University poll was sponsored and conducted by the Monmouth University Polling Institute from October 29th to November 1st, with a statewide random sample of 403 New Hampshire voters. How were the voters included or excluded from the poll? This is the key thing. It was a group drawn from a list of registered Democrats and independents who participated in a primary election in the past two election cycles or voted in both the 2012 and 2014 general elections and indicate that they will vote in the primary in New Hampshire in February of 2016. This does not include new voters. This does not include anyone who is 21 years of age or younger, because if you're 21 or younger, you could not possibly have voted in two primaries, nor in the last two presidential elections. That is just the reality. This includes, and actually it may be even more than that, because if it's two presidential elections, then we're actually talking all the way back to 2008, which means that if you're under 25, you were not even included in this poll. So that is a definite red flag. And it was a fair criticism I received that I did not mention the specific sample of yesterday's Iowa poll, because when you consider that the Iowa poll had some of the same issues with regard to landlines and what determines a likely voter, same issues there. However, let's not ignore that the same poll in New Hampshire with the same methodology last time had Bernie Sanders up 8 and now has Hillary Clinton up 3. So both polls may have had demographic issues and they may still be inaccurate, but the demographic issues were the same when Bernie was ahead and now that Hillary Clinton is ahead, albeit within the margin of error. So let's ask the real question here. With regard to the Democratic primary, can we trust any poll if it is going to overstate landline respondents and understate mobile phone respondents, if it is going to, by its very nature of determining who is a likely voter, exclude young voters who are much more likely to support Bernie Sanders than Hillary Clinton? If that is the case, maybe we just can't trust any of the Democratic primary polls at this point, at least at the state level, many of which seem to have this exact same issue. Let me know your thoughts. President Obama destroyed Republicans at a fundraiser over the last couple days for complaining about last week's Republican CNBC debate. He mocked the Republican rhetoric about taking on Vladimir Putin and all of that stuff, basically making the argument that if the Republican candidates couldn't even handle the CNBC debate moderators, how could anyone possibly believe that they're going to handle Putin and out-negotiate China, as Donald Trump has been famously saying? Let's go to the audio and video of President Obama addressing this.
Have you noticed that every one of these candidates say, Obama's weak. He's Putin's kicking sand in his face. When I talk to Putin, he's going to straighten out. Just looking at him, he's gonna be. And then it turns out they can't handle a bunch of CNBC moderators. I mean, let me tell you, if you can't handle those guys, then I don't think the Chinese and the Russians are going to be too worried about you.
So the point, again, Republicans can't handle the moderators at CNBC, and they expect us to believe that if we turn the country over to them, they're going to keep us safe. They're going to be able to handle Vladimir Putin or China or whoever it is. But it is also a matter that very good optics, right? President Obama speaking in a way that really got the crowd excited and into the absurdity of not handling CNBC moderators and expecting us to believe they'll handle public affairs, international affairs in a reasonable way. But also that debate, one of the failings of the CNBC debate, was that the moderators were not really able to control the candidates. The candidates were able to stamp all over the questions asked. They were able to not answer questions. They were able to take 2 minutes to, instead of answer a question, just criticize the moderators. And in Ted Cruz's case, still have the audacity to say that he's not being given time to answer the question, even though it was his choice to avoid the question and bash the moderators. Now, some on the right said, oh, President Obama's comments are offensive. President Obama is being mean to the Republicans. The right has regularly and persistently talked down to President Obama, referring to him as Obama without even saying that this is the president of the United States. They interrupt him. They yell, "You lie" at him during State of the Union addresses. It's a position that has all of a sudden garnered no respect from some of the same Republicans who say, oh, he's being mean by saying the Republicans can't handle the moderators. It is the epitome of the double standard. And let's not forget that President Obama can do no right in the minds of many of these right-wingers if the situation was reversed and it was Democrats criticizing a president who was a Republican and criticizing Democratic candidates in the same way. None of these Republicans would have the same point of view. I think that it was hilarious. I think that it was absolutely spot on. The only piece of data I think is missing is that the moderators themselves also didn't do a great job of controlling the candidates, although the very specific questions about the tax plans that were posed to the Republican candidates were absolutely spot on. It is exactly what we need to go to Donald Trump and say, hey, that tax plan of yours, it would explode the deficit. Explain how it would work. It is absolutely spot on to confront Ben Carson and say, your religious tithe-based tax system is insane and it would explode the deficit. Those aren't gotcha questions. Tax policy is a big deal. Many voters are deciding based on what these candidates are saying they would do with regard to taxes. We need to be pushing them for the answers on the tax plans. And we immediately saw that the plans fall apart under just the most basic questioning. Donald Trump and Ben Carson both saying, yeah, the numbers don't matter because the economy would do so well that it would counterbalance any deficit exploding impact. A ridiculous, laughable answer from Ben Carson and Donald Trump. President Obama didn't do anything offensive here. He's actually making a pretty good point. Okay, yesterday we made a huge mistake in our reporting of the new Republican debate demands that surfaced after the last CNBC Republican debate. I got a bunch of emails about this. We totally messed up. I read you a list of demands which we reported as demands that Republicans wanted to have as part of the debate. And many of them were actually things that the Republicans did not want to have. Ned Flaherty, who is always all over fact-checking us, emailed me and he said, during the show on the 3rd of November, You quoted 7 of the 8 demands exactly opposite of the actual demands. The Republicans were demanding that future debate organizers not allow candidates to ask each other questions, not have lightning rounds, not show audience and moderator reactions, not show empty podiums after breaks, not talk about the distance between the podiums and the bathrooms, not show candidates from behind where you might see their notes, and not talk about the audience participation rules. I was correct in saying that there were demands about keeping the temperature cool, presumably because some of the candidates have a bit of a sweating problem. So I laughed at the demands yesterday. Now that I'm correctly analyzing them as the opposite of what we reported yesterday, which was just a mistake on our end, the demands are even more embarrassing, right? Candidate to candidate questioning is one of the best ways to actually get some insight into the thought process and the ability to go back and forth of these candidates. Saying we don't want candidate to candidate questioning shows us that these Republicans, at least some of them, realize that they wouldn't come off looking very good if they were actually questioned by their opponents. The lightning rounds, that would more obviously expose when a candidate doesn't answer a question. If you go to a candidate and you say, hey, here's a question about taxes, you have a minute to answer it. It's much more easy for a candidate to filibuster and say, listen, we have serious problems facing America today. And what we don't want is to continue this oppressive regime of the Obama administration, blah, 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 blah. You can hide a non-answer much more easily in a minute than saying, hey, lightning round. Do you support raising taxes on those earning over $1 million a year? Yes or no? If you don't want to take a position on that, or if you simply don't want the voters to know your position on that, the lightning round makes it much more difficult to avoid answering. So now that we stand corrected on that list of demands, it is even more embarrassing and has even further exposed the Republicans for the I don't know what other term to use, for the scaredy cats that they are with regard to having to actually take positions and answer questions and engage with each other and maybe see that their general ideas that they're able to present when they're interviewed, maybe by Sean Hannity or Greta Van Susteren or Rush Limbaugh, they don't stand up to the most basic fundamental questioning, as we saw in the last debate with the questions about taxation posed to Donald Trump and Ben Carson. Send me your thoughts on this. What do you think about these ridiculous demands made by Republicans for future debates? I'm on Twitter at @DPackman, and we're also on Facebook at facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program depends on the support of you, our audience, through the membership program. Today's new member of the day is Jason Begley. Jason, thank you so much for being a member of the David Pakman Show. Jason gets the bonus show, the commercial-free audio stream of the show, the commercial-free video stream of the entire show, and so many other great member benefits, including a discount on the 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar. More on that a little bit later. Sign up for membership. Join Jason at davidpakman.com/membership. It's great to say that you value independent media, but why not support it for just 16 cents a day? davidpakman.com/membership. It is time for this week's Hatriot Mail.
It's like taking an apple pie, filling it with pages from the Old Testament, topping it with hollow points, and serving it with a side of homophobia. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
I love it when Hatriot Mail takes a break from just being homophobic, anti-Semitic, etc., and actually addresses issues of the day. Now, often the context of addressing those issues will still be homophobic, anti-Semitic, etc. Today, we have a double dose of Hatriot Mail. These Hatriot Mails tackle immigration. These Hatriot Mails tackle the Democratic candidates involved in the presidential primary. These Hatriot Mails tackle last week's police officer who flipped a girl over in her desk at school and dragged her around the floor like a mop. Let's take a listen to the first one.
Pac-Man is just a leftist sucking kike.
Right.
Jew fag. Pac-Man needs to get raped by illegals. You and your evil people's days are numbered. Like a good leftist, always tearing down patriotic Americans without offering better solutions. Such first-rate entertainment. This show and those who watch it, I'm guessing, are typical leftist liberals. Bernie Sanders is a non-leader who cannot hold on to the microphone. Clinton has disgraced herself repeatedly, almost to criminal status. Get a clue and go Republican, the party of Lincoln. Just saying. Trump 2016.
There you go. There is an idea. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Hatriots chiming in about last week's viral video involving a police officer flipping over a student in her desk and dragging her around the floor like an old mop to clean the floors. Let's take a listen to that.
Was given too much the rights for nageurs, and now they are your masters. Policeman was just doing his job. Girl needs to obey authority. David Pac-Man, a fag and a Jew.
You can never avoid the anti-Semitism and the homophobia. I am Jewish, I'm not gay, but it does not matter. Whether it is a Hatriot Mail about a timely issue or about something we talked about 5 years ago or about something we never talked about, you will very often get anti-Semitic or homophobic comments. And this one also including a completely insane spelling of the N-word, Negers. Not surprising that some of the people most likely to use the N-word also don't know how to spell it. The big news, fight the Hatriots, support Hatriot Mail. I'm so glad to say this. The 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar is now available. I don't have one in hand yet. This is the 2015 Hatriot Mail calendar. The 2016 calendar has 13 brand new Hatriot Mail related images put together by viewers of the David Pakman Show. The calendar is available at davidpakman.com/calendar16. Everything you need to know is there. If you want a free calendar, we have a deal where if you sign up for a year membership, you get the calendar for free. davidpakman.com/calendar16. Fight the Hatriots and support Hatriot Mail. davidpakman.com/calendar16. Last year, we sold 122 of these calendars. I would love it if we could sell 200 this year. I think we can do it. This might sound like a recycled headline, but it isn't. It's that the move away from religion continues in the United States. There's a new report from the Pew Research Center, which shows that the percentage of Americans who say they believe in God, pray daily, and attend church regularly continues to decline. First of all, the portion of Americans who say they are absolutely certain that God exists has dropped from 71% to 63% since 2007. The real headline to me should be that 63% of Americans remain absolutely certain about something for which they have no evidence. That's truly the headline for me. Also from the study, the percentage of adults who describe themselves as religiously affiliated is down to 77% from 83%. Okay. And lastly, the share of the U.S. adult population that considers religion very important to them, prays daily, and attends services at least once per month has declined around 3 or 4 percentage points over the last 8 years. This is a small, but it's described as a statistically significant shift, according to the authors of the study, because it continues to happen over a pretty short period of time. The fascinating question for me from the poll was how many people say that they pray daily. And I like to say the poll says how many people pray daily. I think a better explanation is how many people say they pray daily, because I think many people out of guilt may say they pray daily when they actually don't. That number is at 55.1%. 55.1% of respondents, supposedly a representative sample of the entire country, say that they are praying daily. It's so hard for me to believe this because I don't think I know almost anyone that ever prays. I might be able to come up with a couple people I know that I either assume or know pray on a semi-regular basis. So I don't know if some people lied about praying daily because they thought that was the right answer. I don't know if many people told the truth on the poll, but are lying to me that they pray daily, or they try to hide that. Or maybe if you consider the parts of the country where people are more religious, it's just accurate. I mean, here in the Northeast, growing up in Massachusetts, living in New York, spending time when it's outside of the Northeast, primarily on the West Coast, it seems almost impossible to believe that more than half of this country prays on a daily basis. But that is what the poll suggests. I don't really know what to think about that. I think we can blame the move away from religion, at least partially, on better scientific understanding of the world around us, understanding of how things work. But I think we can also blame the move away from the religion, at least a little bit, on publicly known religious nuts, right? I mean, who would want to have Kim Davis's God as their God? Who would want to have the God that fundamentalist religious nuts claim hate gays be their God? That's not an appealing God to many people. Obviously, to some people, it still is pretty appealing. But to many people, that is just not appealing. And I totally understand how that could have an impact on the religiosity of Americans. I would expect this trend to continue as it has for decades in the United States. Middle-aged white Americans are seeing increasing death rates, which are confusing researchers. Why is this happening? We see that while non-whites and younger people and people in other countries are seeing falling death rates, a new study shows that the opposite is happening for white men and women in the United States, age 45 to 54. What are the factors that researchers have connected to these rising death rates for white adults in the United States? Number one, suicide. A study shows that white middle-aged men and women are committing suicide at unrivaled rates. This connects to the mental health crisis in the United States. But the question still remains, why are whites more likely to commit suicide than other demographic groups? There's really no simple answer. Researchers say it has a lot to do with culture. They say, quote, "It is striking that suicide rates are highest in white females and white males. This is a complicated social and cultural phenomenon. It has to do with a mix of risk factors." They say this is not an urban African-American issue as much as it is a poor rural white male issue. Culture comes into play. A culture of not treating depression comes into play. The rural culture, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Very interesting. Also a factor, drug and alcohol abuse. Prescriptions for opioid drugs for pain control have increased significantly since 1990, and white people are exponentially more likely to be on those drugs. The New York Times reports that 90% of people who tried heroin in the last decade were white. Heroin often comes after being prescribed some kind of opioid painkiller by a doctor. That's another factor. And then the general decline in mental and physical health. Middle-aged white people reported problems with walking a quarter of a mile, climbing just 10 stair steps, standing or sitting for 2 hours. Even shopping and socializing were difficult physically, and those are huge risk factors for suicide. If physically you can't socialize, that is a risk factor, and the lack of socialization can make you more likely to commit suicide. So it all makes absolute sense. And lastly, another risk factor, financial stress. Financial insecurity weighs heavily on U.S. workers, and it is disproportionately affecting those without university degrees, often rural, white, middle-aged people in middle America. So this is a real problem, and the takeaway here is very clear. This is a suicide crisis that we're having, and we need to connect suicide to the lack of access to mental health and the stigma around mental health, the problems with wages, and the problems with access to health care, even for those who are cognizant of the reality that depression and anxiety should be treated by mental health professionals. Even if you can get past the stigma, the cost and access to mental health services is also a factor. And this is all connected to life expectancy. So when we say, hey, listen, let's let the for-profit insurance employer-connected status quo remain because of business reasons, well, you could make that argument, but that's not a very ethical argument when you see how it directly correlates to increased death rates for many groups, this particular study focusing on middle-aged white men and women. Very disturbing stuff, and we need to not forget this in the context of discussions about healthcare as we proceed. After the break, I will interview cosmologist Lawrence Krauss, one of our favorite guests on the show. How can we think about what there was before there was a universe? He joins me next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to have Lawrence Krauss back on the program. He's a theoretical physicist. He's a cosmologist, a professor of physics, and also director of the Origins Project at Arizona State University. Dr. Krauss, I read with great interest last week, or maybe it was the week before, about a new science release that life on Earth may well be even older than previously thought. And this inevitably got us into a conversation about, well, what was there before life? And what was there before planets? And what was there before the universe? And eventually, I think my brain just sort of breaks. And I start to think, okay, well, so maybe there was just empty space, but that also would be something. So help us suss out, how do we even begin to think about what there was before the universe, if that term is even relevant in this thought?
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. We have to begin to be prepared to change our ideas about what makes sense. And that's not unusual in science. What we're used to in everyday life may not be appropriate to describe the universe. And if you're talking about the beginning of the universe, the beginning of space and time themselves, then it's clear you're going to have to begin to give up cherished notions. Because, for example, if space and time just begin when the universe begins, which I think is the most reasonable assumption, and in fact my last book is more or less describes how plausibly that could happen. And then if time didn't exist, there was no before. And then all these ideas about cause and effect go out the window. We have to change our ideas. But you're absolutely right. If you have space and nothing else, there's still something. But the remarkable thing, and one of the reasons I wrote my last book was that if we understand gravity as a quantum theory, then space and time themselves are part of that theory and become dynamical. And just like in normal quantum physics, particles can pop in and out of empty space. If space itself becomes a quantum mechanical variable, space and time themselves can pop out of nothing. You can literally have no space and suddenly pop a universe with a very small universe initially with space and time right there. And so literally the space that is our universe need not have existed before that quantum event. And what's amazing, and to me it's worth celebrating, is the fact that if that happened, you can ask sort of what would the conditions be that would on a universe that began that way, and what would it look like today, and more or less the characteristics of the universe that we look at and we see are precisely those characteristics of a universe that would have been created from nothing by some quantum mechanical event. So everything is consistent with that plausible possibility. Now, I want to emphasize it's just plausible because we don't have a full quantum theory of gravity. We can't do the calculations. So this is a plausible argument, but not yet ironclad.
And of course, you wrote the book, A Universe from Nothing, Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing. Talk a little bit about, quantum physics can be quite challenging for the average person to understand, but I'm wondering if you could tell us, when we think about quantum gravity, is that sort of, instead of thinking about it as we know gravity to function on Earth, is that a good way to sort of hypothesize about what we mean?
We've already had to change the way we think about gravity. Einstein made us change our thinking about 100 years ago. In fact, actually, exactly 100 years ago, I think this week maybe, when he published his theory of general relativity, where he demonstrated that gravity, the force we feel on Earth pulling us to the Earth, is actually a representation of the fact that space is curved, that matter and energy actually curve space and time, literally, and that we therefore no longer think of gravity as anything but a property of space-time. And space and time themselves respond to the presence of matter and energy in a way which is described by Einstein's equations. And the variables of gravity, then, the important thing that determines what happens are the quantities of space and time. And in quantum mechanics, if I make space and time quantum mechanical, then on very small scales, they'll fluctuate, because quantum mechanical objects fluctuate on very small scales. They're what are called quantum fluctuations. As I say, in atoms, there are quantum fluctuations of electrons and photons and all sorts of things going on. But if space and time themselves become quantum mechanical, then space and time will fluctuate. And that's the idea, that ultimately on very small scales, you could literally have baby universes popping in and out of existence all the time.
For some people, when they hear this conversation, they say, it just makes much more sense to me that God created all of this stuff. Now, even for the non-religious, my question is not for you to address that. My question is, for the non-religious, can you see how it can, because it's so hard to even really understand this, it can be a challenge to say, yeah, I can get behind that. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I can certainly see this wild, what apparently is a story, seems to make very little sense or seem implausible, except we're driven to it. The difference is that we didn't invent it because we liked it or we wanted it to be that way. Experiment has driven us to that, and the difference is the story makes predictions. It makes predictions about how the world works, and in fact, those predictions can be compared with observations and they're the best predictions in all of science. The predictions that quantum fluctuations are happening inside atoms allows us to calculate the energy levels of electrons in atoms and compare it to observations to over 10 decimal places of accuracy. It's the best prediction in all of science. So we know it works. And so the notion that these crazy things happen is not just a figment of our imagination, but something we're driven to by experiment.
In order to really understand what it is that you're talking about, most people probably, based on their existence for a few years in the grand context of time, see time as very linear, A to B. Do we need to think of time in a different way to understand what may have been here before the universe, if anything?
Well, yeah, probably. We don't know exactly how. But as I say, if time began, then you have to start thinking a lot differently about how things work. But we don't have the answer to that question about if time began. Does it make sense to talk about it before? Those are interesting open questions. But again, to get back to the question we had before, which is why some people prefer to think God did it. The point of this is that these ideas make us uncomfortable, and we don't know the answers. But that's better than saying, well, I'm uncomfortable, and therefore I will just assume I know the answer because it makes me happy. That's just not the way the world works. And it's incredibly exciting to see the way the world actually works. That's why I actually wrote my last book, because to me it's worth celebrating the amazing discoveries and the fact that the world works differently than we imagined. That shouldn't upset us. That's called learning. That's the excitement of being alive, to realize that every day we can discover something new and exciting about the universe.
I'm currently reading Yuval Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, and he talks about how there are just certain periods of human history that unless we have a time machine, we're not going to know more about. There is not evidence we can find. Is your sense that we will ultimately have a definitive answer about the origins of the universe?
My sense is I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do know one thing: if we don't keep trying, we'll never find it. I also know that people who say science can never answer this question have an incredible conceit when they say that, because how do they know until we try? At this point, we are in the threshold of asking and answering questions that I never thought we'd be able to address when I was a graduate student 30 some odd years ago. I never thought we'd have a picture of the universe that we have and the observable windows that we have back to almost the beginning of time. It's amazing to me how much progress has been made. So I fully expect progress to continue. And while there may be much more about the universe we don't know than we do know, that should excite us. And there's a lot more to learn. But there's no evidence at this point that there are limitations on what we can know. We should not be daunted. We should just keep trying.
We've been speaking with Lawrence Krauss, director of the Origins Project at Arizona State University. For more about this topic, check out his book, A Universe from Nothing, Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing. Thanks as always.
Thanks. It's always good to be back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Few stories I've been meaning to talk to you about. One is we have a new Gallup poll about support for the Tea Party, and Tea Party support is now at a record low. You probably have not been hearing nearly as much about the Tea Party lately. Support is indeed lower than ever. A record 54% of Americans say they are neither supporters nor opponents, and that is telling because it tells us how irrelevant the Tea Party has become, in the sense that most people have no position on it whatsoever. And only 17% of Americans now consider themselves supporters of the Tea Party. And as you might remember, the Tea Party emerged in 2009, sort of in opposition to the Obama administration. Americans took sides for or against the movement in the 2010 midterm elections. And that's when the Tea Party, apologies as I punched my microphone there, that's when the Tea Party really was at its highest peak, and support peaked that month, November of 2010, the election month, at 32% support. And support then eroded over the following years. Opponents of the Tea Party started to gain the upper hand, and the support for the Tea Party has eroded. Now, I think that the poll is accurate, but it also misses a really important thing, which is that the Tea Party, in a sense, has been sort of absorbed into the Republican Party. So while support for the Tea Party as a discrete group or political movement is lower than ever, we now have a much stronger, what I would call, Tea Party presence within the Republican Party. And we said this years ago. One of two things would happen to the Tea Party. Either the Tea Party itself would become a bigger movement, or it would essentially disappear as its ideas become integrated into the Republican Party. And that's what has happened. Look at John Boehner and what happened with the Speaker of the House. John Boehner, I don't know that I want to call him the victim, but certainly on the receiving end of the anti-establishment Republican backlash that has been widely Tea Party led. And he ultimately decided to resign as Speaker of the House and resign from Congress altogether, ultimately replaced by the new Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, who has certainly been more of a darling of the Tea Party movement. So the reason in part that the Tea Party has not been in the news is that support for the Tea Party as a discrete movement is lower than ever, but also the Tea Party has succeeded in making its views, I won't say mainstream within the Republican establishment, but certainly more integrated into the base core beliefs of the Republican Party. So very interesting, and I think that Tea Party are two words you will hear probably less and less as we go forward in the 2016 election. Big news from China. I know it's normally Lewis on the bonus show who talks about China, but I'll talk about it today. China has decided to end its decades-long one-child policy, according to the state-run Xinhua news agency. Couples are now going to be allowed to have 2 children. And for those who aren't familiar, since 1979, China has had a mandatory one-child policy, and this was designed to slow the rate of population growth in China. There were numerous exceptions to the one-child policy. In rural areas, families were allowed to have 2 children if the first was a girl. Other exceptions included ethnic minorities, couples where at least one parent was a single child, and the negative implications of this one-child policy have been significant. Infanticide, forced abortions, although never admitted to by the Chinese government, are essentially considered to be undeniable in China. By some estimates, the one-child policy is said to have prevented 400 million births, but that number is heavily disputed by others. Some say the number is far lower. Maybe 100 million births were prevented by the one-child policy. Enforcement since 1979 has included fines, loss of employment, forced abortions, as I mentioned, and now we are seeing a change in this. And the interesting thing is that this change in the one-child policy is being partially attributed to the aging population in China. But there are population analysts, who are saying it's too late now because it's going to take a while until the children that will be born in the next few years will have children of their own. Many of the parents who would have liked to have more than one child are now too old to have any more children. So the Chinese aging population crisis, and crisis may be the wrong term, but the concerns around China's aging population may not be resolved so quickly now after decades of this one-child policy, which again had many exceptions, and many people writing into me who say they know more about this saying, David, yeah, the policy has been there, but there are so many exceptions that, with the exception of the most urban areas, most people did not abide by the policy if they didn't want to. And a lot of it was ideological, the idea that many people did believe they shouldn't have more than one child. And often that was the sort of enforcement factor. And this is also a problem in terms of the population growth. This is a problem that other Asian countries are experiencing as well. We've talked about the problem in Japan with population growth, where people are not having enough children. And in developed countries, the sub-replacement fertility rate is 2.1 children per woman, which sort of accounts for developed nation infant mortality. In nations where infant mortality is higher, you may need to have a 3.4 child per woman rate in order to sustain the population. Taken globally, the total fertility rate at replacement was 2.33 children per woman in 2003, and that's probably changed a little bit. There have been some improvements to infant mortality over the last 12 years. So we'll track what happens in China. This is a very slow-moving statistic, so we may not have news about it for certainly many years at minimum. We have a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received relating to Ben Carson. Take a listen.
Hi, David and Lewis. Huge fan of the show. I just have a thought about Dr. Ben Carson. You guys are saying that you're kind of afraid of him, but I think I have a theory, and I'm curious as to what you think, that maybe the same bigoted Republicans who would not vote for Obama because he's African American are the same people who would not vote for Ben Carson if he was the front runner or if he was the nominee. And
it's an interesting idea, which is in whatever Ben Carson's support currently is, he may have a lower ceiling because of the racists in the Republican Party. Maybe racists will, if it comes down to it, not support an African-American candidate. I don't know that I would put too much faith in that. I think we should definitely be scared that if Ben Carson is the ultimate Republican nominee, even the racists will vote for him to avoid voting for someone like Hillary Clinton or a so-called socialist like Bernie Sanders. So I know that there is this draw to say we can rely on certain realities about the Republican electorate to know that a certain candidate just won't get elected. Remember with George W. Bush, there were a whole long laundry list of reasons why he just wasn't going to win. And arguably he didn't win that first election, but he did become the president. And I think that it's dangerous to rely on that. On today's bonus show, TSA airport screeners' ability to detect weapons has been declared pitiful. We have results from the Ohio marijuana legalization vote. It was rejected. And also news about the 2016 Hatriot Mail calendar. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Get a free Hatriot Mail calendar with your membership at davidpakman.com/calendar16.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.